no idea how much money we lost. We lost so much money, and I'm okay with that. I mean, we win some, we lose some. We lost on that one, and I knew what I was getting into, but it was in the millions, the
Yeah.
impact. But
It's a hard decision, but it's impressive that you were able to come to that, I mean, especially because you founded the company, you have so much invested, but to realize that it was kind of dragging the rest of the ship down. I mean, I think that takes great consciousness. Hello and welcome to Food and Beverage Therapy Podcast, where we talk about leadership, entrepreneurship, and innovation in the coffee world. Learn from experts, CEOs, and leaders in the coffee industry on how they challenge themselves, continue to grow, innovate, and reinvent the landscape that makes up the business I love, coffee. I'm Jake Leonti, your host. I'm the cafe guru at F&B Therapy, editor-in-chief at Coffee Talk Magazine, consultant, and entrepreneur, and I've worked at every link of the value chain over a 20-year career. I'm joined by my co-host, Andy Trindle-Mersch, another coffee expert with over 20 years in the business, and current VP of Coffee Operations and Sustainability at Phil's Coffee, as well as the board member at the Coalition for Racial Equity. So to start today, we have some interesting topics to talk about. I just had a great conversation with Martin Mayorga from Mayorga Coffee. I don't know if you know him. Do you know Martin?
I know of him more than I know him. He used to be a good friend and colleague of a colleague of mine, and many people have known him over the years, and I've seen his name and heard some things about him. Yeah.
Very cool. So you know of him. He's been around.
Know of him, yes.
I had a great conversation with him, and one of the items that he raised that he felt was missing from the industry is listening. And he would say that often roasters would venture down to origin and tell everyone how they could improve and what they were doing, and that they never really listened to what the farmer or producer was saying and what they truly needed. Andy, have you found that this is true in your experiences?
Yeah, I agree that has happened a lot in the past. I do feel that kind of the latest generation of buyers, or maybe just more experienced buyers, still could be from earlier generation, have gotten better. Like some people have called them out on this or pointed this out, but it has historically definitely been an issue, especially in my import years. I saw that a lot where people, even customers of mine would be like, we need them to do this experiment, or we need them to do that, or we care about this, so they should care about that. And I'm a big proponent of asking what a community needs. Doesn't mean you're always going to be the right partner for them, able to work with them if you have different needs, but definitely ask and see if you can help with what they are really looking for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I've seen very similar things as well. It's always like, we need this defect count. We need, you to prepare your fermentation tanks like X and do this like Y. So I agree in general that listening is one of those, what they call soft skills. And yet it's one of the most important skills to have in this world. It's so important to being a leader and supporting your team and creating customer solutions that will serve all parties involved. So I've been on both sides. Oftentimes people talk and sometimes they listen. And listening first, I think, is so powerful. As a consultant, when someone brings me in, I have to listen first. I have to understand where each party's coming from and how each party views the issue or the goals that they are focused on. And then I can merge these points of view into a type of, kind of Venn diagram to see where the common ground is, that normally becomes kind of the trailhead for where we can start the journey. I mean,
right. And what's so interesting, I'm going to cut you off. Speaking
Please.
of not listening, but one of the interesting things is, and that actually is, I just sort of exemplified my own point. It can be so hard to do sometimes. Some people don't think about it. It doesn't even occur to them to listen more than talk. Some people it occurs to, and then just our own, and now I can speak for me, our own enthusiasm or our own interest in jumping in and saying, oh, I understand. This is how it relates to me, or this is how it relates to my world. That's another place where I know I personally struggle sometimes with making sure to remember that I'm just listening and not always talking over, whether I'm agreeing or disagreeing.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's hard. Like we listen and we're always trying to think of like how we can, like you said, interject ourselves, like even when I'm listening to my kid, I'm trying to be actively listening, but maybe active is the wrong thing because I'm trying to think like how I can solve the problem while he's talking instead of just absorbing it and truly understanding what he's saying first. And I think, when it comes to professionally, I try to do better just listening first and then reflecting later and coming back with something. But it is hard. It's not how we're conditioned as humans. And they don't teach us how to listen. They teach us how to debate and how to talk and all these things, but they don't teach us how to actually listen. So I think it's a systemic disparity that we have, but
it is. Yeah, it totally is. And how do you show your enthusiasm or engagement or, knowledge on something if you don't interject? It really becomes this thing where you feel like you have to combat this way of being engaged. And it's a tricky one. There's probably is some fine line, but I have found that when I try to practice that good habit of listening first, usually other people have more interesting things to say than I do. And it's very helpful. Yeah.
And sometimes you go back to maybe some customer service training, where it's like you listen and then to show that, like your enthusiasm or whatever that you are listening as you repeat it back to them, and I do that a lot, especially if I'm talking to people who, maybe if English is not their first language or something like that, just to make sure like this is what you meant to say. And I'm going to say it back to you. And if that sounds right, then we can move forward. And I find that helps sometimes. But also it's just taking it in and then trying to understand, I guess, is the idea, is just to really try to understand and take that to the next level. But I don't know. I guess it's a practice. It's a pursuit. It's something that,
work in progress, I think. Yes.
Work in progress. Exactly. And I think, honestly, even doing this podcast has made me a better listener. And I always kind of liked listening anyway, because I feel like people do want to talk. Then when I'm first meeting people, I let them talk it out. And I think in the first half hour, they get really tired. And then
then you can swoop in with all the answers. You got it out of your system. Here's what's correct.
Yeah, it's like a boxing match. They swing and they waste all their energy. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, now we're ready to have a real conversation because you've gotten all your ideas out, great. And now we're starting from just like a level playing field. And I feel that it's an interesting way to get to the kind of the next level of the conversation for me anyway.
But do you feel like you still get a chance to get out all of your ideas? Or is that not even necessary? Like you can just go right into, agreeing with or deflecting or debating the points that someone else brought.
Yeah, I think that I get to, if I'm listening and I'm hearing what they're saying, then I can either come back with maybe an insight from what I heard or just share a story of my own, like I'll tell you something about, that I've experienced. And then that way, and hopefully it's something that's relevant, that will either change the way they're thinking or reinforce what they're thinking. And I like to connect, so if somebody's giving me all this information, then I'm going to figure out ways that I can connect with them on those points that they just brought up. So that's kind of my first inclination, is really to try to connect with people and try to see where we already have in common. And that's my first level. That's my process, I guess.
Yeah, I like it. It's a good process. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. That's why you're here.
Exactly. I'm a yes person.
Exactly.
I don't know if people would say that about me, but
it's not been my experience at all. You frequently argue with me, which I appreciate.
Yeah, we'll see.
keeps me sharp.
Yeah.
But another interesting thing that Martin brought up, and that Mayorga Organics is into is organic certified coffee. Growing up, I kind of came up in the industry under specialty coffee. It's kind of a product of the third wave back in the early 2000s. And for me, it's always been explained that organic, has no bearing on quality, and it can be often hard for farmers to achieve. And so we should not kind of, give a detriment to the farms for not being able to be organic, as long as they're not using pesticides. And Mayorga's stance is that if you really care about the farms that you're working with, then you shouldn't let them not be, or that they have to be organic, because, pesticides are getting into their water supply and things like this. And I think he makes obviously a good point as well, because those are important things to consider, the health of the communities they work with. I don't know. So I'm torn.
I actually really appreciate organic production, so I have no issues with it. If I felt like I could always buy all of my personal products and my coffee beans organic, I would. I believe in the concept. I like to support it. I'm willing to pay for it. I definitely, though, don't think that it's necessarily the right solution for every community. And that is really like when we go back to that first topic on listening to what a community needs, you really need to listen to what their highest priority is versus telling them what their highest priority should be. So that's some points. Yeah. And it is not to forgive it can also be too easy to just say it's expensive for farmers, therefore we shouldn't try to talk to them about it. Like, I think there's so much gray in there, right? If it's something you really believe in, then you go to the community and you ask them, are you open to this? Have you tried this? Would you be willing? How can we help you get there? Because as a buyer, it's important to us. And you can engage in it that way, because you don't also want to just assume they're not going to be able to, or they're not interested. Yeah.
This is true. And I guess you want to look at what is the barrier to entry for them. Is it because they do want to use pesticides, or is it because they can't afford the certification process, or not being able to grow, continuously on the land? So, because I've seen, communities where they were, high mountains, obviously, but overlooking a town. And this was in Guatemala, and there was a monastery at the bottom of the mountain, right? And so they were using the water, the runoff water that comes from the mountain, as like the main water supply for this monastery. And so they were in a relationship. And so obviously the quality of the water is going to be really important. They weren't organic certified. They were RFA certified. And so they also were not using pesticides. So I think, again, it's like, what are the important parts of organic? Is it the pesticide thing specifically? Is it the regeneration of the earth? And then breaking that apart, because then also in Rwanda, so many smallholder farms that maybe they only have 100 trees. So the process and the price of getting that certified is not livable necessarily, unless they band together and form like large areas. So, but at the same time, they're not using pesticides in a lot of these farms. So they could theoretically qualify, but maybe they just can't. They don't have the right landmass to be able to make it happen.
Yeah. And I also have heard a statistic, I don't know the exact numbers on it though, too, that a lot of times farmers will pay and have to pay for organic certification for 100% of the farm, right? But they can't necessarily sell their entire production as organic. So they can't help recoup their costs effectively. I mean, that happens with other certifications as well. So it's not a problem strictly of organic, but it's definitely one that exists. Another interesting thing that someone posed to me when I was asking them, what do you think about this? And this is someone I really, like a lot, and we partner with them. It's in Veritas. So they do a third-party verification, just telling you what exists, right? That's how we work with them. But one thing he said is, the thing that can get nuanced a lot is, what about a great farmer who is doing, so this goes to your point of like, what is the overall goal? Who's doing regenerative farming, who has shade tree practices, who has, the highest paid workers in their community, who has, just a myriad of like whole planet care in their program, but they use a little bit of allowable herbicides to help with their production, and they can't get this one certification. So you have to be a little bit cautious with, demonizing or criticizing, or again, telling a community that they need this certification, because they might be best in class across the board, but they need to use a little bit of herbicides to make sure they get enough production so that they can keep their farm sustainable.
Absolutely right. The thing that is positive for organic is that it's easy for the consumer to read, right? It's like,
yes,
all the nuance about how it's being cultivated and raised. And, these are things that we know because we're in the industry and we're paying attention to it. But the regular person who's just shopping is going to see that certification, and that's an easy answer to pick up. And so that's automatic value put into that bag of coffee.
Correct. And unlike all the other certifications, for the most part in coffee that we talk about, that one is also regulated by the government, right? So you have the National Organic Program. So not only do you have all the requirements that are there, the recognizable label, you have the government auditing it. Whereas the government isn't auditing Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance, Veritas, any of those. They're not part of a government structure, if that matters to folks.
Yeah, you suddenly have to put your trust in just the company that you're working with. And you know what? Some people have more trust in a trusted brand than they do in the government at this point. So, sometimes
this is true. More, I'm not saying where I land on that. No, I do. I land on the, yes, of course I do. But, yeah.
When it comes to food, I'll tell you though, I'm like, I do buy organic because I especially don't trust food grown in the U.S., honestly, unless it has some sort of, certification on it.
And is it organic is the seal that you really look for your food?
When it comes to fruits and vegetables, yes. It is.
Yeah. We do at my house as well. So there is that answer, or that perspective. That's what we choose to buy if it's available. Yeah.
There you go. Hello and welcome to Food and Beverage Therapy Podcast. Today we are talking with Martin Mayorga, founder and CEO of Mayorga Coffee, based out of Rockville, Maryland. Hi, Martin. Welcome to the podcast, and thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So part of what we focus on in this podcast is leadership, but also entrepreneurship. And you clearly have a rich entrepreneurial spirit. You started your first company in 1994, Mayorga Cigars, and eventually sold this and transitioned into coffee in 1997. Were you or are you a cigar smoker?
I dabbled. The cigar world was more for me a nostalgic world. In fact, that I grew up in Nicaragua, and part of the memories I had as a child was driving from Managua to Esteli, where my dad liked to go buy cigars, but more importantly, go hang out with the Cubans, the Padron family, the Pacense family, and sit around and drink coffee with them. If we were there on a weekend, we'd spend the night on Saturday nights. They do a pig roast and drink rum. And I think it was very nostalgic for me. And when I wanted to give back and engage in Latin America, that's kind of the first thing that just came to my mind. I said, well, I know the cigar guys and they're pretty big players. Let me just go to Esteli and figure it out. I became a cigar smoker and I enjoyed it. But it was more, kind of the course that I take. It's less about the product and more about the impact and the process. But yeah, I enjoyed cigars and I still do occasionally. I don't have time as much as I used to smoke a cigar, but it's something I've enjoyed. And I think I was more just in awe of the premise of literally taking leaves, rolling them together, and they become, $20, $30 product. And that was kind of that nuance I learned very young of what we see as very basic in our country in Latin America can be through marketing just turned into this massive margin, massive revenue generating product. And I think that was part of the first lesson. And I think more importantly, I think I had the opportunity to have my first mentor, even though I didn't really know he was my mentor then, Lou Rothman, who was the founder of JR Cigars. And he was just a very direct, very straightforward guy. And he taught me all about, being fair to everybody from the producer to the consumer, being, honest, all the things that he taught me, I think put a lot of business values in the forefront for me that I still carry.
Mentors are such an important part, I think, of anyone's journey, especially in business, but in general, just having those sort of, kind of elder leaders that can help acclimate you to the environment is so important. What is it that led you away from cigars and into coffee then?
It was an interesting transition, and there was kind of an overlap. So I actually signed my distribution deal with JR's in 97, where they took over all distribution. And that allowed me to really go from, I was already bringing in green coffee in 94, 95. And the reason I started bringing coffee at all was I would be in the valley of the tobacco area, and then up in the mountains, the coffee room. And I basically lived at a cigar factory for months, and I learned a lot about coffee and I enjoyed it. But then I learned about the supply chain of coffee through a family friend who was literally going to abandon his farm. And I said, well, this is just ridiculous. I mean, why is the supply chain so bloated and inefficient when it doesn't need to be? And I used that learning and knowledge to then start working on the green coffee with this family friend to help him out. And frankly, I had student loans to pay, so I was trying to help myself out a little bit. So we made a nice deal where, hey, whatever you get now, the delta above that, we'll split it 60% your way, 40% my way. So it was a transitionary period from 97 when I actually started roasting coffee. And because I was now able, I had the time because I signed the distribution deal with JR Cigars. And then I sold the trademark for cigars outright in 2001 to JR Cigars. And we're doing pretty well. I mean, we're selling 3.5, 4 million cigars a year. I mean, it was a pretty nice little brand. But I applied the same principles of just, good, straightforward marketing, drive value up and down the supply chain, be efficient. Then eventually I realized in trying to sell green coffee in the mid 90s, which you can imagine how many roasters existed then, which is very few. I literally heard from people, well, we don't buy coffee from outside the US. We only buy it from New York. And I was like, wow, there's some ignorance in this industry. And I'm not going to change that ignorance, so I need to step into the industry naturally. So we were probably the first ever direct trade roaster to exist in the late 90s. And then we went all in with coffee by 2000, 2001.
It's really interesting. And you started the cigar company when you were young as well. You were 18 or 19. And then to grow it to having 3 million customers. I mean, is that that's one of the first great lessons, right? Is get into sales, and that's kind of the main place that you got to cut your teeth in business to kind of take that next step. And then when you transitioned into coffee, were you the one when you started roasting? Was it you personally that was roasting? And if so, where did you learn that craft?
Yeah, it was me doing everything. And I actually learned how to roast on a 55-gallon roll drum in Mayorga in Nicaragua. Hand turned, so
Amazing.
I wouldn't say I learned how to roast. I learned the principles of roasting, right? Because that wasn't the ideal scenario. I then bought myself a little, I think it was like a 10 kilo and I'm going to start roasting. And I applied the principles I learned in Nicaragua, but then obviously I now had commercial equipment to do it on. But it was really interesting, and I wouldn't trade that for anything, because I think the way I learned and what I roast is more just the tradition and the kind of, the way people in Latin America like to drink coffee and the way it's roasted for our flavor profile.
Absolutely. And was that profile, I'm imagining because it was an oil drum, that the coffee was going to get pretty dark in there, yeah?
It was pretty dark. It wasn't the most consistent you'll ever see. And, it was rough around the edges, but I think you learn the science, right? I think that's where the craft isn't so much developed, but the science of what happens at certain temperatures and the first crack. And, so I think that led me to learn the science. And then frankly, I just dove into it, bought that little roaster and just did test batch after test batch after test batch. And you have to understand, back then, nobody was doing what I did. So I could pick up any customer I wanted. So before I knew it, I was doing all the Dingalucas and I was doing all the gourmet stores and, private brand and, through practice, just getting dialed in to roasting the way that I believe was the best way to roast, which is really ultimately what most roasters do.
In Central America, is there any influence with they have like the torrefacto style coffee of adding sugar to it in Spain and even other parts of the Caribbean? Is that a technique that they use there as well?
No, not America. We typically add sugar afterwards. I mean, I tell people a story. I started drinking coffee at 2.5 years old with café con leche, which is milk and sugar and coffee, So I think here in Latin America, we add a lot of sugar generally. And I think partly it's because it's not the greatest. A lot of the high quality stuff is exported. So we already kind of start off with not the best product. And some of the national kind of commercial brands in our countries are coffee and then whatever grains are left over, rice and corn. So some interesting flavor profiles that require sugar. So I think,
they have the best sugar though. I mean, normally a lot of the places the cane grows there as well. So you get that amazing pure cane sugar, which is really nice.
Yeah, big time. Yeah.
And at Mayorga now, what machines are you roasting on?
We have mostly the G120s, the ProBat G120s. We have a 23R that we decommissioned right now because we're kind of transitioning into another building. But the G120s right now are just keeping us going. We run those things hard. 6, 7 days a week.
Yeah, they're beasts. They can handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And about how many pounds a year is Mayorga going through?
It's anywhere between 9 to 12 million.
Very nice. So it's been a good amount of growth in the last 20 years. And what's your daily coffee ritual? What do you like to do in the morning?
I wake up super early. I roast my own coffee in a little, precision hearthware, like, just basic roaster. I don't get too scientific with it. And yeah, I have my little fellow set up. I grind every morning. I just use I actually use a Mocha Master for brewing just because it's easy. When I'm traveling, I do the fellow, little pour over, and I do all that stuff. But and one of the things I started recently to make myself work for my coffee is I hand grind it. So I have a little hand grind. I'm like, I'm not gonna be lazy and just kind of push buttons. So I'm gonna actually grind each batch by hand. So that's kind of yeah. And then I'll have a cup or two at like 3 o'clock, which is very common in Latin America. Unlike most Latinos, I don't like to eat anything with it. But in Latin America, it's a big thing to have either a sweet pastry or even savory, like a tortilla with cheese or something like that. But I don't like food in my coffee.
Fair enough. In the afternoon, I can go for a little dolce or something, something sweet. I love that idea though about doing the hand crank. I always keep a hand grinder on hand, one for camping situations, and also the power goes out. I've been in situations when I lived in the Northeast and the power went out, and I was like, no way is this going to hold me back. I gotta be able to grind this coffee. This is happening.
You have to be prepared for anything. Yeah,
exactly. So you have, I've been doing a lot of research about you, and you have a lot of opinions on direct trade and its flaws. In your opinion, what is an example of direct trade that's done well?
I think the only example is where you work every aspect of the transaction with the farmer. I think it's become an easy marketing ploy and almost a survival technique for roasters because they think everybody wants to hear it, so they just use it. They'll see the name of the farmer on the bag that they bought from a trader, and they'll say it's direct trade. I think it's a very simple concept. Direct means direct, right? So we work everything with the producers. We don't negotiate. They tell us their price and agree. Or if it's high, we say, well, it'd be tough to sell that coffee at that price. And they're involved in all the dealings from talking about pricing to getting paid. And it doesn't stop there, right? That's almost kind of just the beginning of it, right? Because then it's how's the crop going? How we, can we support you to renovate? One of the things I talk about all the time is financing. People don't realize the coffee industry is all about financing. If somebody doesn't understand that, then they need to really study the industry. We're the number 2 traded commodity in the world.
Yeah.
Most mills, people don't realize, they're owned by banks. And most traders or the multinationals are banks. The big trade houses are essentially banks. So what is coffee to them? Coffee is hedging. Coffee is an asset. 2, layer behind what they really do, which is financing. And financing to who? To the poorest people in the world, who they can charge whatever they feel like. And then they get even more creative with it, where they say, well, not only can we charge these people whatever we want in trade finance and any kind of financing, we can make them buy our fertilizer, or we can make them pay for our agronomy services, and we can charge them whatever we feel like. Oh, and by the way, we can mill their coffee and charge them whatever we want. And we can tell them that the drink was actually 20% instead of 12%, because how would they know? And so what people don't realize is that is the opportunity to change lives. And that is the opportunity to change the course of our industry, which is not changing. So all the conversation, and I have a lot of opinions because I have a lot of knowledge based on the fact that I dedicated the first 15 years of my dealings in this industry in Latin America, learning the realities. And so I think that we have a lot of misguided people on the forefront of the conversation, and I think it's hurting the industry rather than helping it. So that's why I have a lot of opinions. That's why I'm pretty vocal about it. Look, I'm 50 years old. I've been in this industry 25 years plus. And I actually haven't seen it get better for the poor remote farmer. I've seen it get much worse, much worse. And what I've seen is a new crop of different types of farmers come out. Expats with money who invest in farms, these states who are wealthy families who happen to own the car dealerships and the hotels and the banks and are super, super wealthy, and coffee is just one of their portfolio businesses. The indigenous remote farmer is just falling off. They can't feed their families. So I think education is so important for the industry. And I think we have an industry that believes they're educating consumers when they haven't educated themselves. And I think it's very dangerous.
Yeah, and it seems like the education is kind of one way. Like we're spending all this time educating the consumers when really the people growing coffee and the people who are making those interactions need more education as well. Because to your point about it being about financing, in some of these places, they don't even have bank accounts, so they depend on the mill to kind of focus and to work as their bank as well. So again, how are you really getting the correct numbers? How are you able to really look after your finances? And you become so dependent, and it creates this culture of dependency within the mill producer relationship. And I mean, that seems like a huge problem to me. That seems like a big issue with the power paradigm.
Oh, yeah, that's the biggest issue. I would add one other element to the education topic, which is the industry underestimates the amount of education that the roaster and retailer can have from the producer. I think that there's a huge arrogance where people think they can come to our countries and educate people who have been in an industry for generations and educate them. And at no point do they sit down and hear them out. And to me, that has been the success for Mayorga. I'll sit with a producer in their home and ask them stuff. And, my wife, who has worked with the company for, over 10, 12 years, she would get so uncomfortable. She's like, how do you ask such personal questions? I said, because this is how I learn. What are they really dealing with? Is me giving them 30 more cents a pound going to do anything if they're paying 21% interest and the bank is making them buy all the fertilizer and the bank gives them chargebacks, which a lot of people don't realize, there's a price paid to the mill or the exporter, but then there's another invoice that gets pushed back to the farmer of, the kind of after the processing costs. And you have to then also be open to learning from the producer. And I think that there is a wide arrogance. And frankly, I somewhat take it personally as a Latino from these countries of, it's kind of that white savior thing, where it's like, I'm going to come and teach you everything, when our communities and our producers have plenty to teach us. And I think it's a missed opportunity not to come down to our countries and actually say, I'm going to listen 70% of the time and talk 30%. And I think a lot of companies would be much better if they did that.
I think that is a very rare occurrence in the time investment that you put into it, and really putting in the emotional effort as well, and listening to people and really finding that out. Already something you said, because I've done about a good amount of importing in my time as well, but I also didn't realize that. So like a farmer will sell their cherries to the mill, and later they get an invoice back for the processing, so to turn it from cherry into green.
Right. Yeah. And that's where the little shell game happens, right? Where, you sold it to us as fair trade. The client didn't need fair trade, so we sold it, regular, but they still have the fair trade certificate and they sold it as fair trade. So I almost call it's almost like the mistress relationship. Like, I don't want to ever let my wife meet my mistress, right? I don't want the producer to ever talk to the consumer, because I told the consumer this is fair trade or organic. I told the producer that the buyer didn't want fair trade. There's a lot of things. Or I didn't tell them that the shrink was only 11%. I told them it was 17%. I mean, we literally, when we start new relationships with mills, we'll put somebody at that mill to watch the scales. As crazy as it sounds, there's even stories of trap doors behind the scales. Things like that. And to me, that is even, again, an insult to the culture of our countries, because these are people typically from European American countries coming to our countries thinking we can do whatever the hell we want. And, I'll give you a great example. We set up a new relationship years ago, and this was my learning process, right? They said, hey, we're the mill, we chose these guys as the mill, we worked out all the math. And they said, and we have a great financing program for your producers because we have your contract, and if you sign it to us, and well, their financing program, where they loan producers money, was the producer had to bring them the coffee. And let's say our contract was like, $2.90 a pound when the market was $1.20. They would give them 60% of market value, which the market was $1.20, for our coffee that was contracted at $2.90 at a 22% interest rate. And I said, well, why are you loaning them money against coffee that you have in hand with a contract that I now assigned to you so that you could treat these people better? And one of the biggest red flags that I saw in the moment I learned the kind of shell game of nobody's really in the coffee business, they're in the financing business, I have an attorney who works with me who runs a lot of my export companies. He said, look, I looked into the ownership. It's the four major banks in this country that own this mill. They're in it just for the financing. So they will use any opportunity to make more money in interest, and I think their premise is, who's ever going to find out and who's going to complain? We're loaning money to these people who are not credit worthy. And so there's little things like that just people don't realize, and even I didn't realize. I'm like, oh yeah, it's great. I aligned with this mill and they're going to help our producers through, some cash advances. They were taking my coffee essentially that was contracted at a great price, giving them a loan at half the value and a 20-some% interest rate. So those are the things we need to address. Those are the things we need to investigate. I think this narrative that's so easy of like pay more, pay more, pay more. My theory is if the model is broken, why are you feeding the model more?
Right.
Break that model apart, understand the components, and then pay more. And then maybe realize that you don't have to pay more, because at the end of the day, we all have to realize we're in a very, very competitive business. And no offense to any of these small roasters, I'm not in this for 20, 30 bags at a time. I'm here to change a 200-year-old issue that has been created through billions of pounds of coffee, and I want to reach scale and volume to make an impact. I want to take 1% from this national brand. I want to take 3% from this other national brand. That's the impact. Those are the people that are kind of part of the systemic issue. And I think we need to have a much more diverse conversation than pay more and, make these poor farmers jump through hoops so that we can offer something really special to our consumers who can't even taste the difference.
That's absolutely right. And I think, I've definitely been on the soapbox about paying more, and to the consumer, because that's often the argument, is that it has to come from there and then back channel, and, then the roasters will be willing to pay more. And that's that sort of trickle down domino effect. But I think, your example is an example of someone who is doing direct trade, believes they're doing direct trade, has set up a good price for a coffee, and then still gets the switch pulled on them, and has and the fact that you understand that happened is just an attribute to the amount of listening and talking that you're doing directly. Because I think most people are probably happy to just say, oh, done. I did it. I'm paying the right price, and ignorance is bliss, and happy to just feel good about what they did, without fully understanding exactly where that money ends up, and having a way to track that. So I think that's really interesting, and I appreciate you sharing that, because that's something that I think even people who are trying to do the right thing and trying to engage in direct trade in a meaningful way might not even understand that, or be able to understand that in that way. So I think that's a really powerful example.
I want to add something to that, because I think it's important in order to understand Mayorga, I think you have to understand really, and I tell people all the time, I didn't mean to start a company at any point. I saw wrong. I saw something that really hit me personally, and hit me at a level where, my dad was somebody from Nicaragua who wanted nothing but to help his country and his people, and realized that it was nearly impossible. When you have a company founded on truly caring about making that impact, we'll put anything behind that. We'll kind of say, this is what matters to us. Everything else will come along. The marketing, the whatever. Like, I spent millions upon millions of dollars over 10, 15 years understanding, learning. And frankly, I think that then you have layers behind that of who really who generally cares about, making an impact for producers, and who's doing it just because that's the thing you just do nowadays. When you're in this as long as I have, and as long as you have, nobody talked about direct trade 10 years ago. I was talking about dealing with farmers directly 10 years ago. People didn't care. Who are these people? They all look the same. The farms all look the same. I mean, those are the comments I would get. So I think we also have to be very honest, which is, and it's okay if you want to grow a business, you want to feel special because your coffee is this or your processes are that. But I think this premise now of that's the forefront, that's what we're not all doing that. Because to genuinely care is to be willing to lose everything and to put everything on the line, and to delay gratification of building a business over creating impact. And frankly, I don't see that in the industry. A lot of people ask me, who else have you seen in the industry that's like Mayorga? And it sounds very arrogant to say, but I haven't seen anyone. We've been all over Latin America, and who do I meet? Traders and importers on behalf of companies that make claims that clearly are not true. I think that's a big reality too. I don't know. I'm at a point where I just feel like the industry needs a dose of reality. It's like, it's okay to not prioritize this, but don't pretend to, because it's it's a disservice to people who really, this is life or death to some of them. And I think it's very dangerous.
And I know that you put, you put your money where your mouth is when it comes to what you're talking about, and being part of setting up the producer roaster forum and trying to promote that dialogue between the two parties, which, I think is really important. It always starts with a conversation. It always starts with listening and like you said, trying to learn from each other. And it sets it up because it promotes roasters going to Origin and having these relationships on their ground. Then it automatically kind of puts the producer at a position of power somewhat. And so it gives more gravity to their words. And obviously the people who go to this event are there because they want to learn something. They're there in the right spirit. And what kind of impact have you seen from this event?
Well, just to back up and clarify, I actually have no ownership or involvement in PRF. So PRF was created by Henry Wilson from Perfect Daily Grind, who I got to know through, actually, I didn't know him. I found out about PRF, I think in like 2018. And I was like, this is cool. This is what I've always believed in, an event that comes to our countries and talks to our people. I messaged Henry and I said, hey, you're doing this event. I think it was in Guatemala. I said, tell me what options you have for sponsorships. And he gives me a number. I'm like, Henry, this is nothing. I want to make an impact. I offered him 5 times that. I said, I'm going to start being your sponsor to kind of prime the pump so that you guys can develop an event. And now we're doing pretty major diamond sponsorships, and we have a multi-year commitment every time. And frankly, it's a big investment for us, but it's a big investment because it's a necessary investment. And I think just a psychological premise of industry coming to our countries, talk to our producers, and eat our food, see our roads, see our mountains, see the beauty of Latin America, because I think a lot of the press kind of tells a different story. I think that's very powerful. And I personally have a policy where I don't do speeches to anyone except, I don't talk to anyone but producers or students. I don't like to talk into the industry because I think it doesn't listen to me. So it's a good opportunity for me personally to have conversations with producers and do very loose kind of, just open forum conversations and the things that come out. I can give you an example. In the last talk, we just had this kind of open conversation with producers. And the main question was, what can I do to start moving up the supply chain where I go from just selling cherry to maybe selling coffee and parchment, right? What can I do to transition into organic? So here in these other rooms, everyone's like talking about, you have to do these processes and shoot for this point score. And these producers are like, how do I mill my coffee to the point where I can get an extra 10 cents a pound from value add? So those are the real conversations. And my goal for my involvement in PRF is to be the conduit. And I talk to Henry all the time, and I'll say stuff to him where like, hey, I don't want this to be an event where the market comes and tells the producer what to do. I want this to be an event where there's idea share, and it can be 50-50, but we need to hear from the producer what they need also. Because the pay more response is too easy and very misguided. And to me, that's a response that's basically saying, hey, the industry screwed up for 200 years. Now the consumer has to pay for it. It's not fair to the consumer. So I think PRF is the perfect and needed event for that conversation to happen.
I also think something else that's interesting is the fact that you are so committed to organic as well. Organic, for a pocket of years there was a shift in the language where specialty roasters would talk about the caveats of organic and how difficult it was for individual growers, and they had to let their land lay fallow, and so it was kind of a detriment to them. And then there was the argument that pesticides are so expensive that many of the farms are organic by default anyway, even though they're not certified. So you've obviously doubled down on organic and believe in it. Why organic, and is it achievable for smallholder farms?
It's actually more achievable for smallholder farms. And I would just start with saying, and I say it all the time, and it's not popular. You cannot pretend to care about producers if you're okay with them polluting their own land. We can't talk about how much we care about a farmer when we watch them poison because a lot of these small farmers, you have to understand, that are part of cooperatives, live on their land. This is their home. Their children play there. Moreover, where are coffee farms? Good coffee farms are towards the top of a mountain. What happens when it rains? Those chemicals go down into the community, into the river. We also have a sense of responsibility that our choices are impacting people all over the globe. And I think there's a very selfish aspect to how people think of organic and say, well, I don't really care if my coffee is organic. Well, that's great for you. But now you're putting money into a decision that is polluting communities, potentially making people sick. Like I said before in one of the Mayorga videos, I literally saw a family dressed like they were going to like a nuclear fallout site. So this is their backyard. How do I support this? I can't. And I think the premise of, oh, it's got lower yields, is this or that, even the 3-year transition, it's very clear where we're headed with soil health over the next 10, 15 years, and topsoil basically being non-existent in most farms. Would you rather take a 3-year transition where together with a good roaster like Mayorga, you figure out the numbers and then have longevity? Or would you rather realize that in 10 years, you can't grow anything because your farm is in the desert, which is where it's heading? And it's very clear. We have videos where we show an organic farm. It's lush. It's got nice moist soil and foliage that covers everything and keeps everything, the microorganisms alive. And then a conventional farm, it's sand. And the dirt just acts as a way to hold roots that you have to feed with external inputs. So again, I'm very adamant. And again, you have to realize where I come from, which is I care about producers legitimately as people and about their communities. And I think it's irresponsible to support that spraying. And some people will kind of argue, well, it's irresponsible to ask them to have a lower yield. It's not a lower yield. I mean, you deal with like a co-op like Capuca's in Honduras. Their yield is just the same as a conventional farm. Why? Because they do soil studies, they understand what exact inputs they need to put in. They're on the farm, they're cultivating it. And that's why for smaller farmers, it's easier, in my opinion.
How is it that Mayorga supports the farmers through this transition?
Well, it's a tough one because we don't sell conventional coffee. So I don't, and one of the things I'm toying with is developing a brand that sells conventional that's in transition. Typically what we'll do is we'll help them align with quality buyers, that are more just kind of exporter level. And then, once they're fully transitioned, we'll buy their coffee from them. The reality is, to be honest, most of our relationships are 8, 10, 12 years old at this point. So it's not something we deal with too much. And that's one of my biggest frustrations, which is every day, every week, we're approached by producers. We have to first and foremost support the people who have supported us over years. So we have a very tight defined roster of producers. So we're not seeing that transitionary need really over the last, 8 years or so.
Got it. And so you've been living in Costa Rica for a couple of years now. And was that move a strategic move to be closer to where coffee's being produced, or was it more that you just want to go back and live there?
I think Miami was kind of the first hop over here. Look, I was born in Guatemala. I grew up in Nicaragua. Costa Rica is a very special place to me because we fled a revolution from Nicaragua, literally drove full speed to the border, ran out of the car, left everything behind, and Costa Rica accepted us. And, it's always had a kind of a special place for me. But I think also the reality that I flew to Guatemala a few weeks ago, and it was a hour-long flight, not even, I can get to Medellin in an hour and a half. So I think the proximity to everything is nice. And I feel comfortable here. This is kind of where I'm from, and the food I eat, and the culture, and there's a certain level of, I don't know, I love the organization of the U.S., but I also love, I give an example. Like I was driving from my house to a restaurant there's a couple guys on horses just on the sidewalk, hanging out by a bar, drinking beers. And I was like, you don't see that in the U.S. The cops would be like, what are you doing riding a horse? So there's this kind of sense of freedom and self-responsibility where it's like, well, you want to ride a horse on the sidewalk? Don't trample anybody and don't get yourself killed. Good luck, So that, and again, yeah, I'm super quick, like most of the countries we work with, and producers can come here very easily as well.
I do love Costa Rica, and the food is amazing. I've always had a good time there. It's also very interesting because it is, maybe a little bit more financially stable than many countries in the region.
Yeah.
Where you see really interesting innovation happening on the coffee space, when it comes to fermentation and drying practices and things like this, and the access to equipment that you wouldn't see in many countries, where you're even reducing the amount of water that you're using during the washing process. So do you feel like that is, I don't know, kind of a great testing ground to be around to see what's like kind of the latest innovation on that side?
Yeah, it's something I've seen. And frankly, I have to be honest. I mean, my big concern for our industry right now is that we are going into this huge separation of the volume growing countries, Brazil, Vietnam, Honduras, Peru to some degree. And then these smaller countries like Costa Rica, it's a double-edged sword, right? It's coffee's dying because how do we compete against, Brazil, Honduras, and the markets that are just terribly underpriced? But at the same time, the good is these coffee farmers are saying, well, I can develop houses here and have a vacation rental or sell it to a developer. So it's progress too, right? And I always tell people, look, the US has gone through these also the stages, right? Where it's agricultural and then it's manufacturing, blah, blah, blah. So I think we're also evolving out of that. It's sad because our industry, I think, is going to hurt. And I think ultimately what we're going to have is there's going to be kind of large scale production and there's going to be the smaller, more fine tuned production. And to your point, the things I'm seeing here are really cool. It reminds me when Colombia started really pushing kind of the wet milling into the farm level. But, I'm actually looking at there's some friends that own a farm here and they're like, oh, we want to sell it. I'm like, well, I kind of have a policy where I don't buy, I don't own farms. But in Costa Rica, there's really nobody doing it. We worked with a lot as we just decided to stop doing organic. And now I see it as, well, maybe we can be the voice for organic in Costa Rica. And if I buy this farm, one of the things that I've seen is how cool the micro mills that are being developed here are, with little to no water, with just so many cool things. And the footprint is tiny and you can have this little kind of boutique farm and have its own little micro mill within it, and very cool stuff happening. And I think it needs to happen. So yeah, definitely it's a good place to be for that. I think Costa Rica and Colombia are really the leaders in that from what I've seen.
I agree. It's when you visit farms there, it feels more like the way you would visit a vineyard in the US or France, where it's like just beautiful fields, and then the processing is at such a high level. La Lajas is one of those perfect examples, of like just great milling, great coffee, great craftsmanship. It is also, to your point, kind of part of the problem for the industry, right? It's like, because we haven't done a good job taking care of farming community in general and putting value into the land, you're finding in these other places where it is progress that they're going to sell that land, or they're going to develop it and do something that's actually worth money to them. And so as a consequence, we're losing more coffee growing regions. And Costa Rica is one of those places where I saw, they were like, oh, this used to be all coffee growing, and now it's like all town and houses, and
there's developments and hotels, what used to be coffee farms.
Yeah. And that is the danger of happening kind of all over the place. If we're not able to create that value in the land and create that value for the farmers. So I think that's very important. One question I did have for you was, how many employees do you have now at Mayorga currently?
45, 50.
Okay, so you have a good amount of people there, a lot of responsibility. Do you feel that responsibility personally for your employees, and does that weigh on you at all?
That's the only thing that weighs on me. I think building a business and having the responsibility for making sure it's a healthy business, I have to make sure that my team that dedicates their time and energy every day to what we do has a future. Right. And I tell my kids this. I said, look, I'm responsible for people to feed their families, to, pay a mortgage, to put money away for college. And it's a good responsibility. It makes me feel, it drives me and motivates me. But I think honestly, as a business owner, if you don't have that responsibility, there may be something wrong with you, because the people at Mayorga are the reason why we can do what we do. I mean, I'll give you a good example. When pandemic started, nobody knew what was going on, where we didn't know if everybody we knew was going to pass away or what was happening. We had kind of this all hands meeting with our staff, and we asked everybody, hey, we can shut down until this thing blows over, or we can ride this out. And because, as you probably know, our sales just spiked, right? Because we happen to be in a market where there was still business to be had. Every single one of my staff members literally was like, I'm in this no matter what, and the commitment is mutual. I think my greatest sense of responsibility is to the people involved with Mayorga, from producers to my staff, because without them, we couldn't do anything that we do. So I think as a business owner, if that's not your biggest driver and source of stress, then you need to check your priorities.
Absolutely. And you've been in business for over 20 years, and the company has had tremendous growth, and you have this staff. How have you personally grown to transition from a small business owner operator, who is doing, like you said, every job from the roasting and bagging, to the CEO of a larger company with, kind of more responsibility and more management in place?
Look, if there's one thing that I am obsessed with, it's growth. and personal growth is critical to me. So I read like nobody's business. I don't read as much now because podcasts have spoiled me, where they read for me in some sense. Um, but I think the premise of growth has been everything and has allowed me to really make intelligent decisions and, fix the non-intelligent ones a lot quicker. I also think a sense of just reality check on, look, maybe in my 20s I was a little bit arrogant. I had 12, 14 shops with my name on them, and I probably got a little arrogant and stupid, and we weren't really making money. And I think shifting in priorities and growing as an individual, also just checking on what really matters to me. And moments where, look, I'm not an emotional person, but even when I talk to producers, I mean, in El Salvador, I mean, Eduardo, who's, our main coffee person and just placed third in the roasting competition in Portland. He's like, man, you start getting emotional. I was going to start crying. And it's like, I think having that, when you care about something, you want to be better at it. And I tell my team all the time, just like I tell my kids, I've never been the CEO of a company this size. And I've never been the dad of a 17-year-old boy, so in both of those things, I'm a work in progress too. I just believe in very transparent conversation and very, very open communication and having enough self-awareness to realize when I screw up or when I don't know something. And I think that's been a really good thing for everybody because we have very good relationships with everybody involved.
That's great. And I'm sure that there have been many mistakes over the years, as there always is in any business, especially when one is grown organically, Is there one specific example of a mistake within the company that you learned from and it helped you get to the next level?
I think the biggest one was we had a producer group in Nicaragua default on us for the second time on a very nice contract that we did fixed price and blah, blah, blah. And I got really upset because we met in December, everything was fine, but time coffee was really shit, and I basically was like, I'm done, I'm out, and we stepped out, and my now wife back then, she's like, you're reinforcing their belief that you're not here for good. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, wait, that's exactly right, because the mentality is he's going to screw us over, so let's screw him over before he gets the chance to. And the second I just turned my back on them, it taught them that they were right. And it was a big wake up, and this is maybe 15 or so years ago. And I think that was a big mistake to me. And it actually hit me personally because I felt like I screwed up in my beliefs, which is we're going to get through everything together with these producers. And that one hit me to the point where I now realize, like, I'm going to have to eat some, and I still do. We saved a co-op who got into trouble during the pandemic and bought 10, 12 containers from them that somebody in the US had defaulted on because they were in food service. And then they asked for more contracts. We gave them the contracts and they just defaulted on every single one of them. And it's part of the game, and it's part of, if you're going to change the thought process and the expectations, you have to be different. So I think that was a big one. And it's funny, and it's maybe it sounds arrogant, but when people ask me that, I think I don't think of mistakes. I just don't. I lost almost $3 million on the facility in Miami and the operations there and all the installations and pulling it apart again. Could I say that was a mistake? Yeah, but I always wanted the facility in Miami. I got it, and I learned a lot from it, and I moved on. We opened it and closed it almost as quickly. Yeah, we took over the old Bustelo factory.
And that whole operation is closed now?
Yeah, I shut it down because we realized that Miami is basically an island when it comes to logistics. Yeah. And the costs were astronomical to get product in, and to get the efficiencies. We have one manufacturer, say for corrugated, we ship from Virginia up to Maryland and then all the way to Miami. The costs were just huge. And then more importantly, our clients that are national, we'd always give them the option of where they wanted product shipped from, and they always chose Maryland. It's just more efficient. And then the third issue was it kind of was tough to find talent that was able to work on our machinery, right? So, the packaging machines, as you probably know, like New Jersey, Chicago, there's certain kind of hubs for food manufacturing, and Miami's not one of them. So we'd always have to fly people down, pay them a per diem, put them up in a hotel, and it's just like, man, really running things here is very cost heavy. So we shut it down right in the middle of the pandemic. Just because, and then I also realized, I have 2 food scientists, I have 2 curators, so I had this overhead, which I was okay. Obviously, I knew what I was getting into, but the scale never took place because everything kept shifting into Maryland. And I was not prepared for the inefficiencies, to be honest, major inefficiencies operating there.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I was actually just doing some work for a European company that chose to be based in Miami, and as they want to expand into the US, I'm like, listen, guys, you're in the corner. So no matter what, shipping's going to be more expensive. You're not going to be local to the New York and Northeast, which is where the highest population density is. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot in some ways.
Miami's great if you're shipping out, but
Yeah,
to be just to get out of the state is what, 8 hours,
yeah,
driving, and then I think ultimately, yeah, it's that, and the other thing is the Miami market, as great as the city as it is not the hottest market as far as population and volume. When I've been in Maryland, in the heart of the Northeast territory, and dealing with New York and Boston and DC, the volumes are just astronomical.
yeah.
So Miami felt like a small city, small town, um, as far as the market, and it's a market that's maturing when it comes to coffee, very slowly maturing.
It
But
is.
hey,
It is still
it's
slow.
the Cuban coffee.
Yeah.
Cuban coffee rules there, and I respect that because that's part of my culture and my heritage. So I kind of like seeing that battle and seeing the Cubans win it in some ways.
I was going to say too, I mean, it seemed like a really cool move going into the Cafe Bustelo location, because like that has such a big history and so much loyalty from the Latino community. So I thought it was kind of an interesting move for you to go in there and kind of recapture some of that spirit.
That was the intent, man. I mean, very few people even know that Bustelo is not even it's owned by Smuckers.
Yeah.
Smuckers bought them out, and the first thing they did was shut it down and displace people. And my goal was, okay, we're going to bring this thing back to life and bring the community back to, employment and productivity, and bring coffee, Latino coffee, which is what we're known for, and what I think we're the best at. Let's bring this into Miami. And the truth is, consumers didn't really care. They don't really care where you roast your coffee. So
Yeah.
that was another aspect too. So I think it was very well intended, and that was my goal. Is like, we're going to bring this thing back to life, and that Smuckers turned their back on. And frankly, it bothers me that Smuckers puts Miami, Florida on the bag, on the Bustelo bags, and bought the rolling company so that they can still say it's rolling, company. So it looks like it's the same ownership in the same city. They have nothing to do with Miami. So my goal was, let's kind of be authentically a Miami operation, and it was not easy.
Yeah,
Or cheap.
I like the idea about it too, but I think like they say, if you're going to fail, fail fast, right? So it was a huge investment to be there, I believe, because you had a big facility.
You have no
And
idea how much money we lost. We lost so much money, and I'm okay with that. I mean, we win some, we lose some. We lost on that one, and I knew what I was getting into, but it was in the millions, the
yeah,
impact. But
but it's a
we'll
brave
try.
decision to be able to pull out of that. I mean, like
Yeah,
especially when you are so invested to actually say like, okay, this isn't working. We got to stop now. What kind of led you to that decision, or how hard was it to come to that place?
I think there was two top things. Number one, my clients basically don't want product out of there. My big retailers, and seeing the strain I was putting on my team.
Mhm.
All of a sudden they're flying down to Miami because of this, and then the tech couldn't show up for that. So then, all of a sudden I was like, well, this is not an enhancement. This is actually taking away from what I've built over 20 some years, and is working like a fine oiled machine. And now I'm hurting that to try to get this thing to limp along. And I was like, this is kind of a lose lose in a lot of ways. It was disappointing personally because I lived in Miami and I wanted to stay living in Miami. And, it just, I think I pushed it to the point when I saw my team getting kind of fed up without telling me they were fed up. I was like, okay, this isn't fair to them either, because the dream and the vision is no longer doing the vision, now a hindrance. And that's when I pulled the plug.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a hard decision, but it's impressive that you were able to come to that, I mean, especially because you founded the company, you have so much invested, but to realize that it was kind of dragging the rest of the ship down. I mean, I think that takes great consciousness. So that's really impressive.
So I don't know. I don't think in that space of mistakes. I think in the kind of what I took from it.
I think that's really healthy, and of course, it only becomes a waste if you don't learn anything from it, right? And it seems like you've taken these moments and internalized them and learned from them in a big way, which is the most important thing that you can do. And that way you don't waste your time, right?
Exactly. My thought of everything is just put one foot forward every day and you're going to make progress. And that's kind of where I keep my head.
And are you primarily in packaged coffee for online sales and grocery, or do you work in the food service and hospitality space as well?
This is where being a sole owner is great, but it's also a problem. I was very big in food service and I started to hate it because whoever knows about it can tell you a couple things. When we talk food service, hospitality, hotel type of business, you get the opportunity to sell to all these properties, but then you give the parent company a rebate. It's basically a kickback, right? So you're charging the property X per pound. Well, the real price is X per pound plus whatever the rebate is for the parent company. And so you're basically paying them for the right to be able to sell product. Yeah. And frankly, it didn't sit well with me. We're doing, I mean, tens of millions of dollars in this business, and I walked away from it. We were doing a lot of grocery as well. Same thing, right? A grocery store, and obviously they don't want 1,000 trucks at their facility, so they say you need to work with distributors. Well, here's the 3 you have a choice with, and then the 3 you have a choice to work with. Say, well, you need a broker because we need someone, and then you realize these guys are all friends. The broker at that grocery store, that distributor's rep working that desk, and it's this very incestuous thing. And I thought, well, why am I selling to these people who are overpricing my product and screwing over the consumer? I got out of most grocery relationships. I mean, we're in like 8,000 grocery stores. So sometimes owning the business outright and having values and principles. And my business friends who are more about making money say, look, you're the worst business person because you walk away from so much money. And I say, well, I don't feel right doing it. I don't feel right being part of something that I just think is a terrible model. We worked with a very large retailer. I can't get beyond the description on that because you might find out who it is, but we were doing a decent little bit of business, but the way they were marketing their involvement in helping farmers was so disgustingly over the top, where we did the math and they were spending 3 to 4 times more on the marketing of the story that wasn't even true. And whatever they were donating was so small that I tripled it because I was embarrassed to ask my farmers to kind of pose for pictures and whatever these guys wanted. And then one day I was out of the country and my staff called me like, hey, a bunch of hats showed up with this group's name on it. And I called the buyer and they're like, oh, we want you to put them on the farmers and take pictures. I'm like, that's too much, and I wrote a letter to the CEO and we got out. So anyway, I kind of diverged from your question, but I like direct models. I like direct models that allow me to scale efficiently and that aren't making people rich just because they're there. So yeah, I'm not an investor's dream, and my business decision making can be questioned, and rightfully so. But if you look at my client base now, it's where we can scale, be efficient, and provide the best value to everybody.
So what are the key revenue streams then? Like what are the channels that you do sell through?
I mean, Club is huge. Amazon is huge. Some grocery selectively, private label, and then direct to consumer.
Got it. So
we do some green selling too. We sell some greens too. And, because we're so good at this point at specking out coffee, where if somebody's looking for a profile, we know exactly who to talk to, what country, what farms to work with. And so we're doing a lot of that too as well. And frankly, I haven't even talked about it, but I stumbled onto the chia world by helping a co-op in Nicaragua in 2012, 2013 during the Roya issue. We literally saved the co-op from defaulting on their coffee loans by planting chia, paying for the chia, and they paid that loan back through chia. Well, that went from 12 producers putting together a container of chia in Nicaragua to about 7 million pounds of chia a year now. So we have that revenue stream, which is nice. We do black beans. And look, luckily I have a finance mind and I've been smart to invest intelligently, and we have some real estate opportunities that we've taken advantage of and some revenue there and some asset building there. So my goal is, and I joke with my friends that Mayorga is a hedge fund. It's my personal hedge fund. I look for opportunities because I need to keep the health and the benefit of what I care about, which is the coffee side. I need to feed that with something because I am the guy that will not sell to the grocery chains. I will not sell to the, food service who wants royalties and kickbacks and chargebacks. So I create other means that I can keep feeding these things. And Mayorga is profitable, but we're not greedy. We operate on the 7 to 9, 10% margin, 9%, 10% on a good year. So, we run on a thin margin, but we do scale. But I'm always looking for ways to keep the business healthy, and it's very healthy and it's very independent. And that's kind of how I operate it.
It's very impressive and consistent with everything that you've been talking about and everything you stand for, because your beliefs on the importing side and how you're sourcing also translate directly to your distribution side. You don't like inefficiencies. You want that direct relationship, and you want to control the process, and you don't like the idea of paying middlemen essentially for relationships that you could forge yourself. I think that's really interesting. And the idea that you're willing to stand for it, and pay the price just is a credit to your integrity.
Yeah, I've been questioning about having more values than brains, but I think I like to sleep well at night and know that I'm doing what I believe in.
Hey, I'm going to sleep better knowing that there's people like you out there. You're leading by example. And again, that's one of the things that you have to do when you are trying to change an industry. And if you are trying to change the way that things are done at origin, then sometimes you have to be the first. You have to be the leader that does that. And I did see that you're selling green coffee on your website as well. Is this segment of sales growing? Are there more people roasting coffee at home these days?
Yeah, but we're also selling to roasters.
Okay, yeah.
I don't want people to know that, but the coffee industry is so funny. They're just like, well, we don't want people to know we're buying from a competitor. I'm like, we're not really competitors, but fine. I mean, we're not going to go announce it. I think people see how well we do what we do, and they want to be a part of it. But their ego doesn't let people know. But we sell to a lot of roasters, and we do good volume of that business. So we're seeing a lot more people looking for what we do and being able to kind of talk about the farms that we work with, et cetera. So, and also be involved in coming down with us to our countries and meeting producers, et cetera.
And what is next for Mayorga Coffee? What do you see in the future?
We're in the process of expanding operations into a bigger property that we're about to buy. And I want to fire up my brick pack machine again that I bought from Miami. I mean, I bought this thing from Italy. My thing is I'm going to change the brick pack world. And part of the problem of being, again, sounds arrogant, but kind of a pioneer in what we do. I brought out metal cans into Whole Foods in 2003 because for me, it's like US steel, recyclable, a program where people can refill them. It's freaking brilliant. Man, it flopped. Everyone thought, well, cans are bad coffee. We don't want to buy it. Brickpack's the same thing, right? And Brickpack to me has always been the secondary Latin American brand, Latino kind of type of brands for my people from my communities to buy cheap coffee. And I want to kind of turn that on its head and say, look, if you want ground coffee, great, we can do it in a nice brick pack. And so I want to fire up the brick pack machine, get that system going again. We're looking at some more into the ground world, which I've kind of stayed away from, and trust me, Eduardo has cringed for years to stay away from it. But look, our goal is impact first. And one of the things that I always tell people is we'll never put the coffee on a pedestal. We'll never think the coffee is more important than anything. Which I think is a mistake that the industry has done, especially the new kind of small specialty movement, which is it's got to be an 88 cup or higher, or whatever the number might be of the week. I want to buy more coffee so that I can make more impact. And in order to do that, I need to sell more coffee. So more into the ground world, we're working on developing a cold brew can line like everybody else, but more with kind of the twist of what we do, who we are, and the types of coffees that people know us for. And yeah, just to keep doing what we're doing. I mean, we're seeing a lot more interest from pretty major players on private brand. I think now they're seeing that this is the kind of thing that they want to have. And I think they've tried it with the big companies that it's just not real, so we're seeing a lot more need on a pretty major scale, private brand business. So we're getting our facilities ready for that type of growth. Mm-hmm. I want to point out one big thing that I'm doing that I should have mentioned is I've been squirreling away money for years, and I'm doing my own trade financing because having somebody else do it for us is not an option for us, and I think one of the things that, we have brokers and traders beg us to work with us all the time because, they want to finance our coffee. Most people don't realize there's really one bank that finances pretty much every coffee trade. The one bank is owned by the big trade houses. And that one bank happens to now be a major investor in a pretty rapidly growing coffee roasting company that's dominating. So to give our books to that, any trader and just any roaster that does, those people are seeing what you have out there. But more importantly, I can be more efficient. I'm so much more efficient with my money. And my vision and my goal is to do all my trade financing internally and within the next 3 years to raise $100 million. I mean, whatever I can raise and change the industry on the financing piece, because that's what's going to really shift things on its head. Because I mean, I don't know if you've heard, but trade finance from what I hear right now is anywhere 11 to 14, 15%. And the people it's coming from are people I don't like to support. So that's a big shift for me as well.
The independent spirit rearing its head again. And I was curious about that cold brew line, because that was part of the intention when you were getting the facility in Miami, was you were having a canning line there. So it just put you back a couple of years. So you're going to bring it back and try to do that in Maryland. Yeah.
I won't do it. I won't touch liquid, man. After trying it, it's messy. And frankly, there's a sense of responsibility where, people can get sick if you're not doing it right under the right conditions with the right. So I want to leave that to the experts. Right now we're developing the concept and working on formulations, but I realized after spending way too much money, I have a full brewery with canning and nitrogen and everything. I'm going to stay away from liquids on that scale.
Fair enough. Stay in your lane where you feel comfortable, right? Absolutely. And your lane has expanded exponentially anyway into chia and black beans and now financing. Martin, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me and, the very open and honest conversation. And it's great to hear all the things that you have done and what you have planned for the future. Thank you so much for being part of the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcasts. A very special thanks to our guest, Martin Mayorga. Thanks as always for your support and listening. Please feel free to share this with a friend and get more people to listen. Always love to hear feedback and interesting ideas. If you have a guest that you think would be perfect for our show and you'd like to hear interviewed, please feel free to hit us up at info@fnbtherapy.com. Thanks and take care.